Hey, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla, and in today's tutorial, we're gonna be showing you how to create this beautiful pillow cloth simulation using Cinema 4D and Octane Render. We got a lot of comments from you asking to do this version of the tutorial where we finish this scene using Octane. Now, if you want to learn how to make the pillow cloth simulation, be sure to check out part 1 of this tutorial where we show you how to set all of that stuff up. And then come back here to part 2 where you can learn all about how to set up your Octane lights, cameras, and materials to make this gorgeous render. All right, with that, let's head on in and let's get started. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D, and let's get this scene looking great using Octane. Now, the first thing we need to do, of course, is go turn on Octane. Make sure you go into your render settings and turn on Octane. You also want to make sure your live viewer is docked in your interface. If you want to learn how to make your own custom Cinema 4D layout, we have a tutorial all about that. We'll link it up down in the description. Okay, now that we're here, I just never want to look at this white on white looking scene here. It is super ugly. Let's start to light and add textures and get this thing looking a little bit better right away. First thing we're going to do is add an HDRI. So in your live viewer, come on up to Objects and click on your HDRI environment. This is going to make a black HDRI environment that doesn't do anything yet. As soon as you click on your Octane Sky, you want to come down here, and this is where you're going to add your own HDRI. Now, if you click in Image Texture and you go into here, you're going to see File Name HDR. If you have your own favorite HDRI, this is where you're going to click and find it on your hard drive. And of course, if you're a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, all you have to do is drag this file into Drop Zone, and you will instantly get an HDRI, and HDRI link will be all set up so that you can literally click on any of the hundreds of HDRIs here in our library and get instant results right in your scene. I'm going to use one of our new creative spaces here. This office one I've been really loving, office number 5. Now, by default, it's a little bit bright and it's a little bit flat lighting. So let's click on our Octane Sky. Once you have your HDRI selected, you want to rotate it so that the lighting is a little bit more pleasing. Flat lighting is almost never going to look great. This from the camera lighting. You always want it one side or the other. So experiment with that. See what vibe you're digging. I'm going to start with this off to the right here. And I also don't want this HDRI showing in the background. So how do you solve that problem? Well, up in your objects menu, you just grab another HDRI environment. This second one, all we have to do is select it, come down to primary environment, and turn it to visible environment. This is going to allow us to have 2 different HDRIs essentially. One is going to do the lighting, and this second one is just going to be our background. And in fact, we can come in here and choose a different background really easily. Click on this triangle, go to C4D Octane, and scroll down until you find RGB Spectrum. By default, it's going to be white, and we can choose another color a little bit later. All right, now that we have our rough lighting set up, let's get some materials in here. Head on up here into your live viewer, go to Materials, Create, and here's where you could pick a bunch of different types of Octane materials. I'm just gonna make a diffuse material because this is kind of the closest to cloth, and this will just show up right here in your little material menu. And from here, all you have to do is drag it into your scene. Now, from here, I'm gonna duplicate this across all of our materials by hitting Control on my keyboard and dragging it down until all of my little cloth pillows are covered with the same material. By default, this is just white. Of course, you could double click in here. It'll open up your material editor. And here's where you can pick a color and do other things and make it glossy and all that stuff. Now, if you're a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, you have access to all of our new fabrics and materials. In fact, I wanted to show you guys some of the new fabrics that we just released. These look beautiful on these type of cloth effects, and they have displacement built in, so it looks awesome. So let's drag a few of these into our scene here. I'm gonna try fabric linear red, and you can just drag this right on top of any of these pillows in your interface, or you can also drag them into this material zone over here and then drag them onto your object. I'm going to delete these other materials since we're not using those. Let me find one of my favorites here, this orange square grid. Of course, I love this orange one. Let's grab a few more, and we're going to talk about aces in just a second, because this kind of like slightly washed out look is going to get really good looking here in just a second. So bear with me. Let's just drag a few more materials out here. We also have some felt that looks really great. And these architectural carpets look pretty good on this type of look too. This deep earth orange is really, really cool. It's got some good displacement on it. Okay, let's go with these for now. But you may be seeing what I'm seeing, which is this whole thing is just kind of washed out. So what's the problem? Well, you could dial up and down your lights and try to get it going, but what you're probably missing is aces. If you haven't played with aces in Octane, I highly recommend it on every render, and it's super easy to set up in newer versions of Octane. Let me show you how to do that, and I want you to see how different this looks once we set it up. Okay. Over in your Octane settings, let's open this up right here. See this little gear in your live viewer? Click on it. Now, before we forget, we want to change this from direct lighting to path tracing. This is a much more realistic way that Octane renders. And we could turn down our max samples to something like 2000 right now. And this is just as we're playing with this stuff. We may want to crank this up for the final render. Now, here's the important part. You want to make sure you go into your camera imager, go to OCIO, and right here under OCIO view, instead of none, you want to come down and select ACES sRGB. We also want to make sure we force tone mapping, and this is really important if you want to use LUTs or anything else in your scene. Let's close this up. Right now, nothing's changed yet, but if we go up into this menu, you're going to see a new option called OCIO sRGB. Let's go ahead and click it. Boom. Did you see that? Do you see how the bright white kind of got toned down and the contrast got way better? This is like a tone curve, essentially. I'm not going to do ACES justice. If you want to learn more about it, you could do that. But it is so important, especially when using Octane, to turn this on. Let me go back and forth. Here's the original, and here's with ACES turned on. Boom. Love this. Now, here's what's really cool about ACES. You can crank the lighting in ACES. Let me crank this up to like 2. I just doubled the lighting. And look at how well ACES handles all this extra lighting. It's like shooting with film. You get all this nice curve and all this nice contrast built right in. Again, let's just A/B test without ACES, with ACES. Beautiful. Love it. Okay. Now that we have that, what else do we need to do to this scene? Well, let's set up a camera, and then we're going to dial in these textures a little bit. So we don't have a camera in our scene. Let's go up into objects. Let's go click on Octane camera. Now, the first thing we're going to do is select a lens, select a focal length. And this is super important when it comes to setting up your scene and helping it look more realistic. What lens would you choose? If you haven't used a DSLR and haven't really studied filmmaking and cinematography, I'll give you a couple cheats. Scenes like this that feel like they're in a studio, that feel like they're almost like a product shot, I tend to go for more of a zoomed in look for these. So I'm going to go with let's go with an 85 millimeter lens. And as soon as we do that, I'm going to turn on our camera so we can see what that did. That zooms us in, flattens things out, and gives us a ton more detail, of course, by zooming into our scene. Now, from here, we're seeing some issues with the materials. Mostly it's just that these are scaled too large by default for this particular pillow. So all I'm going to do is select all of our materials, come down to tiles, and say, I want you to tile twice on U and V. And this is just going to put our materials in a better scale. We're going to talk a lot about scale. It's always super important to use proper scale in your scene. And this is where I'm going to start to set up kind of our master camera shot. I want to zoom out a little bit, go back to here more, and I'm digging this vibe. I'm not in love with this color in this scene. I want something a little bit brighter there. So let's go into our fabrics and pick something a little brighter. Let's try this fabric gray grid weave. I want to change this material. So here's another way to add materials directly from the Plus library. You can just drag it into your object menu and replace a material. What's cool about that is it keeps any changes that you made to this material, like when we change the U and V, this also stays because we dragged it up into here instead of on the object over here. So I like that one. It's maybe still a little bit dark. We may want to swap this out. Let's look around and see for different angles, make sure our materials are looking good, make sure our lighting's looking good. And this is essentially our far away shot. I also want this to be our hero. To me, this orange one should be switched with this one. So which one is this? Let's click it. All right, so that means I'm gonna swap these two materials. Beautiful. And we basically have our wide shot ready to go. This is our wide. We may want to zoom out a little bit further. Wide shot, boom. I love how Octane is so responsive when I'm scrubbing through here. And to me, this is kind of the hero part. Let's just scrub through, make sure we're where we want it. Okay, if we're happy with this, let's also set up another camera. Let's go ahead and duplicate this camera. And let's set our really zoomed in camera, our like extra detail camera. Two things we're gonna do is we're going to grab our focal length and crank it. I want this one to be way zoomed in, very flat, and I wanna show all the nice details in these materials when they clump together. Still not in love with how dark this material is here. So let's grab one more. Let's go with, I don't know, fabric gray herringbone weave. Let's try that one. I'm gonna drag this again on top of our original, and you'll see this update really quickly here. This is better. I like this pattern better, and I may even shrink this down a little bit as well. Okay, while we're here zoomed in, let's also talk about the displacement of our materials. This will help go a long way in adding more realism to any render. If you haven't messed with materials that have displacement turned on, you want to pay attention to this little part here. By default, Octane automatically displaces any objects that have materials on them that have displacement. Okay, what does all that mean? Well, it means if we open up one of these materials that are from our new tactile collections, all of them include displacement maps. And now, of course, displacement maps help make things look more realistic, makes you feel like you could reach out and touch your materials, but you do have to set it up in the correct way depending on what renderer you use. The good news is Octane just kind of has it on by default. You're going to see in here that displacement is plugged in. It's got all the maps and all the height maps ready to go. And in fact, when we zoom in, you're going to see this displacement. However, it is based on the geometry that is in your scene. In other words, it's only going to be able to displace each of these polygons, and that might not be enough detail to get all of this detail that you want to show in your scene. And if that's the case, all you need to do is add an Octane tag. So in your tags up here, go ahead into extensions, C4D Octane tags, and then click on this tag right here, Octane object tag. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control on my keyboard and duplicate this onto all of my objects. I want it in the same place, thank you very much. And I'm gonna select them all so we can make global changes. And you wanna come down to a subdivision group inside of this tag. So what does this do? Well, every time you add a 1, it's going to double the amount of geometry that is being displaced in this scene. And not just displaced, it also works almost like a subdivision surface, but it does it at render time. So it will essentially double, and then if I hit 2, it'll quadruple the amount of geometry in your scene. Of course, this slows down a little bit, but it is really fast here in Octane once it displaces all. Now you can see we have much more realistic displacement, not just in this material, but all the materials. Check this out. Check out all this beautiful detail that we get. And now the lights are bouncing around. We're getting all of this really, really quickly inside of Octane. Okay, now that we have better displacement turned on, we can set up our zoomed in camera. So for me, I really want to show a lot more detail. I may cheat this over a little bit just so the light is coming in. And I'm gonna scrub and make sure we're getting all this nice kind of clumped together detail here. Ooh, that's a nice shot. All right, let's find our angle. And now we have two different cameras, and I'm gonna show you how to set up both of these to render at the end. But this will allow you to cut in between them when you do your final render. Okay, no camera is complete without what? Wait, I didn't hear you out there. That is right. It's depth of field, folks. I don't know, was that cheesy? You let me know in the comments. All right, to set up depth of field, select this tag over here and come on over to your settings, and you want to first go to thin lens, come down here, and this is where you're going to set your f-stop. Now, Octane, for some reason, when this is set to 2.8, there's no blurriness, there's no depth of field in your scene. All you have to do is grab this and touch it, basically, and it'll instantly start to add depth of field. So even if we go back to 2.8 or whatever. So let's leave this pretty low for now. I'm going to set this at 1 f-stop. This is going to start to make things blurry in our scene. You're going to see this is nice and sharp, and we have autofocus turned on. Autofocus is great if you're doing stills or you're just new to Octane, but I want to control where my lens is focused, right? As a professional, right? And you are a professional out there. Every time you grab a camera and tell it what to do, you are now a camera professional. You want to turn off autofocus. And you, my friends, want to control where your camera is focused. How do you do it? Well, grab a null and go ahead and call this focus. And this null is going to tell your cameras what you want to be in focus. You can even animate the null and do rack focuses and all that fun stuff. But how do you set this up? In your Octane camera, you want to come down here to focus object, and you want to drag in your focus tag. Once you do that, grab focus and literally grab the place tool and watch this. If you want this to be in focus, literally click right there. That part of your scene is in focus, and everything else in front or behind it falls into a little bit more blur. And this works anywhere in your scene. You want this to be in focus, perfect. Well, this won't be, right? Because it's closer to the camera. So now you have control, folks. You could do this to all your cameras. I highly recommend you do that. And for this scene, I think the focus is going to be the same across the board. Let's go make sure that's set up properly in this part of our camera. So let's click to our wide camera. I'm going to name this wide, and I'm going to call the other one CU for close up. And in our wide camera, let's go click on our tag. Let's make sure we do the same thing here. I'm going to set this to a 2.0 aperture. We don't need a ton of depth of field here, but a little bit goes a long way, especially when trying to make this look more realistic. Okay, we also want to make sure we turn off autofocus. And remember, we already added the focus null, so that should be all set to go. So let's go back into our close-up camera, and let's see what else we need to do to really dial this final look up. So usually from here is when I start to test some scenes. And what's great about Octane is it's so responsive. You can just kind of scrub through your scene, and sometimes you may have to just hit refresh. You can just scrub through your scene here and see different parts of your animation and really get a sense of what this animation will look like just by scrubbing through. If you want this to render even faster, you could turn off the geometry extras, because that does slow down just a little bit. But I think for now, I just want to make sure things are looking good across the animation. I love all these shots. Any one of these freeze frames could be the thumbnail to this tutorial. You can go back and see what I actually picked, but a lot of these are really, really beautiful. I love this one. And then I'm going to do the same with my wide camera. And let's just make sure things are mostly in the center. I may pull out a little bit more and just try to center this a little bit better. I'm going to scrub a little bit further. This looks good. This isn't updating, so I'm just going to hit refresh to make sure. That looks beautiful. Let's scrub over here. Oh my goodness, I'm just loving this. The lighting on this wide shot may be a little bright, but I kind of like it. I kind of like how bright that is. One thing bothering me is that background. We mentioned that we might change the color of that background. Inside this Octane sky, let's go into our RGB spectrum and click on this little eyedropper. And here's a little color trick that Chad Ashley taught me that I use all the time. Click the color dropper and pick one of your favorite colors from the scene. For me, it's this orange. I'm just going to grab it. And you can see it instantly color picks that orange and makes it the background because we set that up earlier. Now, of course, this is way too dark for this type of scene, but it does give us a little head start on picking a color that will complement what is in the scene and kind of help make sure our colors are color coordinated. So from here, all I'm going to do is go into our color swatch and just make it a little bit brighter until it is basically the brightness or darkness of what I'm trying to go for. For this scene, I think it should stay bright. These pillows kind of have a fluffy, bright feeling to them. I want to keep that. But now we have this tannish kind of white background that feels like it's a part of the scene instead of just a random color that we picked. So adjust this to taste. I want this pretty bright, but not too crazy. And that is looking mighty good. All right, a couple more scrub throughs to make sure we got some beautiful stuff here. Let's check the zoom in. And again, if something doesn't refresh, just go ahead and hit refresh and your scene will be all set to go. All right, now that we're happy with our cameras and our lighting and our materials, let's go ahead and set up some renders. Now, for this, I want to use takes. If you haven't explored takes, I highly recommend you check out our tutorial all about how to use takes. Super powerful. We're just going to scratch the surface today, but you're going to see how we could use this to really quickly set up a couple renders so that we can render 2 whole animations and walk away from our machine without having to manage different scene files and all that stuff. So really quickly inside of takes, all you need to do to render 2 different cameras is to go ahead and click this plus button. Now it's important to understand everything that we've done right now is inside of this main take. All of our changes, everything we've done in this tutorial is in the main take. All these new takes are doing are telling Cinema 4D what changes we want to make when we render different scenes. So let's go ahead and create this first take and call this one wide. And let's go ahead and select plus again. It's going to make another child take of this main one called close up. And we're just going to use these to render with different cameras today. But I really encourage you to watch that video because takes are really, really powerful as you get to learn them and as you get to incorporate them into your workflow. Okay, so how do we set up our cameras? Well, it's real easy. All we have to do is come over to this camera icon, select our close-up camera for the close-up take, select the wide angle, and come in and select our wide camera. And now, just by clicking between these two, we're switching between essentially 2 scene files, but all incorporated in the same scene file, all sharing the same lights and the materials. So if we want to make any changes, of course, we have to go back into our main take. And from here, if we wanted to change materials or make the background different or lighting different, we could do that. And then it will filter down into all of our takes here. So now that this is set up, it's really easy. So now all we have to do is go into our render settings and make sure that all this stuff is set up. 1920 by 1080 is fine. Make sure you come down here and select all frames so that all of our animation frames will render. Then let's go into save. Now inside of your file, you can just save this like normal, but since we're using takes, we can get an extra layer of control in here by using tokens. We also have a video all about tokens. We'll also link that up. A lot of extra learning today if you want to dive in, but this stuff is super important if you want to speed up your workflow. Inside of this little triangle, you're going to find these tokens. What do these do? Well, they help you name your files so that you could find them later and also organize your renders by where they came from and what camera was used and what take was used and all this stuff. So what can we do here? Inside of these tokens, first thing I'm going to do is grab the project name. So this is literally just going to be whatever we save this project as. It's going to put it in a folder called Pillow Tutorial Start, whatever. Then if I put a slash and then I add another token, for this one, I'm going to use the take name. Then for every take that it renders, it's going to make a new folder. This will keep our outputs really organized and allow us to not only know where everything's coming from, but be able to import really easily for editing and make sure you understand what take is what. From here, we need to do one more thing, which is add another slash. So now we need to tell Cinema 4D what we want to call the actual file name. These are just for folders. But now what do we call the file name itself? Well, we could use tokens for that. We could use the same tokens. I also want to call this the project name, underscore, then the take name, and then another underscore, and then it will put frames after this, and then dot whatever we set this to. You can make this an 8-bit or 16-bit TIFF or PNG. This should be all set and ready to go. Now that this is all ready, check out this. So you can come to your takes now, and you could select any takes that you want to render. And all you have to do is come up into this render menu and click Render Mark Takes to Picture Viewer. Now, as soon as you do that, it's going to fire up your picture viewer. Let's scroll down here, and it's going to start to animate all of this stuff. So let's just wait for frame 1 to happen and make sure everything's going. Literally, it's that easy. So it's going to go through all 300 and whatever frames, 322 frames of our wide angle camera first. And then when that's over, it's going to render all the frames of our close-up, and it's going to organize it, put it in folders. And like I said, takes goes way deeper than this. Highly encourage you go check it out. One last thing I wanted to show you before we take off, and that's how to bake in your ACES looks into your final render. If you just render like this, all this ACES stuff won't be in your final render. So how do you do it? Go into your Octane render settings and come down here to settings, and under buffer type, you want to switch this to LDR 8-bit. And then inside color space, you want to turn on OCIO. And then under select OCIO color space, come down to color spaces and select output sRGB. Okay. And once you do that, everything else should work. So let's double check this before we go. Let's come back into our render settings here, go to render mark takes to picture viewer. Now look at this one first and see how washed out it is. And wait until this next one starts rendering, and you'll see that if we did this right, our ACES settings should be baked into this final render. And boom, let's look at both. Washed out, ACES, looking good, ready to go. Thanks again for watching, everybody. And if you made it this far, let us know down in the comments what other tutorials you want to see using Octane Render. And with that, stay tuned for more tutorials coming soon, and we will see you in another video really soon. Bye, everyone.